Good morning. Yesterday we had an event at our church. It was about the movement Move to Amend, henceforth known as Citizens Against Corporate Personhoods, as mad as a hornet's nest being attacked by a timid homeowner. Yes. And I was looking around today and I found these notes that somebody left, and it says, title, Can't We Privatize Air? I thought, now who are these people? It says, Corporate Activist Judges. What is that? International Corporate Rights. Free trade is constrictive. The internationalization of ownership. I thought, what are these people up to? I guess you'll have to come to one of the meetings to find out, but I'm interested in how they're going to privatize air. I guess if they pollute all the air, then sell you containers of clean air, profit-oriented. However, this is Thanksgiving, and we're going to talk about gratefulness. And I was wondering, how, to say thank you, to genuinely experience the sensation of gratefulness. How many of you have ever thought you've done something and felt injured that somebody didn't say thank you? Or when's the last time you really felt the sensation? Because that's different than saying we should have gratitude, we should be grateful, but had the sensation of being grateful, the feeling of gratefulness. I was apt to do when preparing for a sermon, take a word like gratefulness or another word that's in the title or that's floating around in my mind, and I'll walk into the library and I'll just pull down some of my favorite books and go through the index and look up that word, and just to get my thoughts churning about that topic and idea and see what other people have said about it, just to get things rolling. And so I go into my library and I pick out one of my favorite theologians, a theologian, Paul Tillich, who's probably one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. Went through as a chaplain, World War I and trench warfare. He barely escaped Germany. So when he writes about God and demons and things, I pay attention because he has lived through hells. And so I go to a couple of his books and look in the index for gratefulness or gratitude, and nothing. I go, isn't that curious? Nothing. So then I go to Western theology. I need to say, because it'll make sense later in the sermon, Western theology. So then I say, okay, so I go through some of my psychological books and favorite theorists once again, Winnicott, Bowles, a whole bunch of them, and I look through the get into the index, and nothing. I think, my mind's supposed to be full of the Word and these thoughts, and these are the people that have helped me move through time intellectually and experientially and form my thinking, and nothing. And then I grab some more, so then you get panicky, you start grabbing more, and I'm going, nothing. I go, what in the world's going on here? So I communicate this information to Helen. I said, I got these books. And so then I'm off doing something else. And so, as I'm also apt to do, what are you doing, Helen? When I don't see her, I don't know if any of you do that when your partner's not around. You go, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she says, well, I'm gathering books with about gratefulness. And I said, wait a minute, how are you finding these books that have gratefulness? And I've been looking at it. So one, we've got two libraries, kind of mixed, but books are really separated, and that's sacred territory. What are you doing? What are you doing in my book area, right? So, however we would like to color it, here's got to have some masculine, male stuff and some feminine womanist writings and thinking, and she just goes right to her shelves and pulls these books out, and there it is, Gratitude and Gratefulness. And a number were in books about recovery from addiction. Buddhist books. So here I am looking in Western philosophy giants, not there. Alan just goes through spirituality, Sufism, Buddhism, the addictive world, and there it is. There it is. Is the attitude of gratefulness about breaking the hypnotic trance of Western thinking? So that was my introduction to the sermon, and I think it has meaning, and we'll make some meaning out of that, and you be left to your own thoughts about what that might mean. That here are people that construct the philosophy of the way we live, psychologically and theologically, and when I go look for the experience of gratitude and gratefulness, it's absent. And here are people writing in response to this philosophy, saying that it's got some problems, and there it is. So there's something about the experience of gratitude and the experience of gratefulness that's healing, but also threatening. Because if I have the experience of gratefulness, does that mean I have to let go of these models and belief systems that were birthed out of that literature? So gratefulness stops time. The experience of gratitude stops us in our tracks. Especially if we're caught by surprise. If you have a need or you're in a situation and maybe it's desperate or not so desperate, or maybe somebody just surprises you with something and you're delighted in it, and you have that feeling of thank you. Just that real gut feeling that somebody has paid attention to me, somebody has acknowledged me, not for their needs, not for what they're up to, not in some manipulative ploy that we do this and it's a trade-off, but just an experience of generosity, that I was paid attention to, that I was affirmed, that my well-being was considered, stops us in our tracks when we can have that experience. The capacity to experience gratitude. And apparently if I would have structured my life with that thinking, that Western thinking, maybe it even interferes with my capacity to experience gratitude. Because if I got to thinking about that sense of gratefulness and gratitude, and in some of the works on recovery from addiction and some of the works on, particularly in Buddhism where I found it, talks about, and Thich Nhat Hanh, if any of you are familiar with his work, talks about living out of that sense of gratefulness. Take the feeling you experienced, if you could, and for a moment in time I thought, yeah, of course I could. I know when I felt gratitude, but actually I had to really stop and think about it, and it wasn't as close, that feeling state and those memories wasn't as close to me as I would have first thought. I had to really kind of stop and think about that. So there's a capacity to feel that. And what comes out of that sensation, if we can begin to live out of that sensation, and imagine that feeling that you had, if you could have captured that feeling, looking back in your history, which is another issue, reflecting back on your history, the capacity to reflect back on your history and make meaning is another whole issue, but that feeling that you experienced, can you imagine living out of that experience all the time? That you walked around, that you thought, that you existed in that sensation of gratitude. And that's who you became. And in thinking about that, would give birth to what in spiritual communities, I believe we call servanthood to one another. We'd have a different attitude about how we responded. As Max was sharing the three types of experiences we human has, they, them, us, we, I. When we have those experiences, with that attitude of that sense of gratefulness, when we live out of that, the they and the them, they go away. You don't have that anymore. You see the porch needs to be swept, you sweep it. And you're grateful you can find the broom. Right? Some of us are kind of unconscious, so as I'm passing the patio door this morning, looking at it needing to be swept, and there's the new cover for the umbrella. Some of us that are kind of unconscious, sometimes we need people to say, hey, why don't you put that together? Thank you, Harold. I'm grateful. All right. And go do it. So it's not, sometimes you got to be directive, I guess, but to live out of that, not only out of that sense of servanthood, but I also sense that when we live out of that, a sense of generosity comes. That we are more generous with ourselves and with others. A sense of generosity. We begin to live out of a sense of generosity, and we begin to live mindful of others. And this may sound odd, but I don't think it is. We also begin to live mindful of ourselves.